Can you take me back to kind of, when swimming as a sport was introduced to you?
Yeah, sure. So we grew up in Birmingham, so just like 10 miles north of Detroit, right? And as you know, like summer swimming in Southeast Michigan is ridiculous, right? The number of teams that we have, 3 or 4 different leagues, and a lot of different teams in those leagues, and a lot of kids on all those teams. And so we grew up across the street from a family that had 5 or 6 kids, and their youngest kid was 1 year older than my brother, and they were members of this this local summer swim club called Forest Hill Swim Club. And basically, parents, obviously they were neighbors, and heard about the swim club. Oh, you should join, have your kids sign up, whatever. And so my brother started when he was 7, swimming in the summer, and at the point I was 4, just kind of get brought along to the meets and stuff, whatever. And then when I got to be 6, they kind of, allegedly I wanted to do it. I don't know if that's true or not. But it's definitely easy babysitting for my parents as well, for at least a little bit of the summer day, for that whole season. So, and then from there, first 2 years, you're just a kid doing a lot of different sports, start to have some success, when I'm, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, start winning stuff at a state level. And then, it just became a natural thing to continue on and have that be pretty much, my focal sport, if we're going to really call it what it is, kind of moving through the end of middle school into high school. So, I think just kind of growing in the area and being introduced to it really early, that's one thing. And then also I grew up in our neighborhood, and on that summer swim team, I had, a bunch of really close friends from super early on, right, who were all my same age. So there were a couple other guys who I graduated with, who we swam together from ages like 6 or 7 all the way through high school at that summer club, and then also eventually at our club team, and then for high school as well. So I'll stop there because I could go on. I'm sure you have follow-ups on that, but I would say that's swimming it's a brutal sport in a lot of ways, right? But it was super fun from that aspect. Like summer club swimming was always super fun, and to me that's also part of why, this is a side tangent we don't have to go on, but I think part of the reason that kids are so fast, so young, in traditionally in Southeast Michigan, if you follow it for going back for a long time, is because these summer swim clubs are super fun. Kids join. The vast majority of my friends at least tried it for a year or two, right? And everyone has a good time. And then you get a little older, you get into high school, and it's still so much fun that a lot of kids just do summer club. They don't train long course. So it kind of flips on its head a little bit. But so it's kind of just how it all started.
You mentioned 11 or 12, in that range, you really started to, win state championships. I think you said, if I asked you if there was kind of a turning point where you really started to internalize that you could be really good at the sport, is there a meet, a race, a year? Is there any kind of point that you'd point to and say that was probably where I realized how good I could be, or that I could be good?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2. So there's 2 different, called races or very short time periods. I think one was when I was in 8th grade, I turned 13, and then you're 13 going in, then you turn 14 at the end of it typically, right? So I got stuck finally in the 13 and up group for my club team. So prior to that, you're training 11, 12s, and the 13 up group, you're training with kids who are a lot older than you. And, at that point I'm in 8th grade, and my club swim coach at BBD, which is my club team, Birmingham Blue Dolphins, he was, he's a super nice guy, and he's not like a hard ass or anything, like hard ass, but he's he wouldn't let, he really pushed you. If you're 13 years old, he still pushed you pretty hard. So, trained definitely a lot harder that entire year than I ever had. Like it was, instead of doing 50s and 75 repeats in practice and getting a bunch of rest because you're better than, a lot of the other kids, you're really getting challenged every day by kids who are older than you too, right? And so at the end of that year, basically I went from being a backstroker to being a 200 and 500 freestyler. I dropped like 10 seconds in the 200 free, went like 148, I think, or something. Yeah, like 148 when I was 13. So a huge drop. And all of a sudden it's like, that's actually a pretty good time, especially back in 2003. So I said, okay, you enter high school and now you're pretty good. That was one. And then the second was my sophomore year of high school. So freshman year, I do pretty well, you know, but probably leave something on the table, at least at the high school state meet for sure. Swim better at Y Nationals a few weeks later. And the next year, and then, you know, my brother graduates, goes to college. And then, so the next year it's, you know, we've lost my brother and we've lost this guy named Matt Burke, who was a really good swimmer in his own right, scored a ton of points all 4 years of high school. And at that point it's like, okay, well, you know, people have got to step up. And so I don't remember exactly like why I internalized certain things or whatever, but I just remember like really enjoying working hard a lot more that year, and just really wanting to get better. And there were a couple races in that season that, you know, I think I was swimming against some people who were a couple years older than me, and, you know, going into the race, wasn't totally sure how they'd go, or, you know, was a little bit nervous. You know, there's a guy from Lake Orion named Dave Brown who was pretty good, and like he was almost as tall as I was, and was a really good swimmer. I think he was a senior at the time and had a better best time than I did. And like we had a dual meet against them, and my swim coach Tom Wiley, my high school coach, who we got to talk more about Tom at some point because he's the man. But he just was like, you know, don't be nervous about this. Just sprint the last 75. Like, don't do anything else, but just sprint the last 75 yards. Everyone sprints the last 50. Just sprint the last 3 lengths instead. You know, just stay as close as you can, turn on the gas, and just see what happens. And I remember, so I won that race, and I think it was my best time ever. And then I just kept doing that for the rest of the year. Like that particular race strategy was just kind of like, all right, just do what feels right for the first 125, sprint the last 75 yards, and, you know, we'll just see what happens. And, you know, turned in some really good times that year. And from then it was just, you know, things kind of snowballed. But it was just kind of, I think, a shift in both times. It was just like, all right, I worked a little harder and felt better about doing it, more mentally tough. And then also just, you know, once, I think, I'm sure a ton of people have this experience where it's like, you know, you have one good swim and then all of your training after that is so much better because you've just had this one race you've had to break through, and you know that you can do a particular set of times or you know, hit the type of the pacing you're trying to hit. And once you can do that, once you prove yourself, you do that once, it just comes so much easier to practice day to day. And so a lot of my best training was usually like pretty soon after a taper meet, oftentimes, because it was just like, you know, you take a week or two off, you get back into it, and pretty quickly, like I'd be right back to where I was right immediately prior to that taper meet. And so, you know, I think that was the mental piece of it was pretty big for sure.
Just kind of taking you through chronologically, we'll come back to some of that high school stuff in a second, but I wanted to ask you, yeah, I am in the same year. I was nowhere close to him in the pool, but I'm in the same year as Rafi Carpathian. Yeah. So when he set that 50 freestyle record, it stood for a long time. And of course, your brother was the first person to take that record down. And as we were talking, I've been doing the math here in my head. I think you would have been in 8th grade then at that championships in 04 when he went. Yeah. When he went 20:36 and broke Rafi's record, which had stood since 92. So a 12-year-old record, one of the longest standing 50 free records. Can you tell me, we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about Dan today, but I wanted to ask you before we move forward into your high school career, do you remember watching him run roughshod through those high school championships? And, you know, as a junior high kid, I know you swam with him as a freshman, but how did that impact you, and what were your observations of what he was doing? Yeah, I mean, you know,
he was always huge in the pool, right? You know, relay stuff coming back from, you know, a bazillion seconds down in like a 400 freestyle relay, you know, in closing a gap of half a pool length on somebody, right? You know, I mean, he was a freshman, so he was 20:36 as a senior, and I actually didn't get to go, if I remember right. I don't think I went to watch state meet either his sophomore or junior year, because I think that was the same weekend as like the Michigan 12 and under state meet, which I think I had to be at for if I remember correctly. I'm trying to think here, but I do remember freshman year when he went 2042 as a freshman, which at the time was the fastest time for a freshman ever. And there weren't a lot of people really expected that. I don't think he did either. And so I just remember watching that and being like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, right? And so like super exciting to watch him swim like for years after that. Like I was his biggest fan in pretty much every respect, right? Apart from maybe my parents, let them have that title. But definitely came with some pressure for sure as well, or at least some expectations from people. But I would say the one good thing about it all was that like we swam different events, thank God, right? So he's a sprinter and I was a distance swimmer. But again, it's one of those. I've watched a lot of his races, watch him come back and beat a lot of people, and it was always something he kind of had in my back in my head after he again was in college of just like, all right, well, his name's on the record board this many times, like, can we match that? Can we beat that? So it's kind of stuff like that. It was always just another carrot to kind of go after.
So you did kind of personalize his accomplishments as something that is possible for me, not, oh my gosh, he's unbelievable. And you kind of looked at that as he's setting the bar that I'm going to go try to touch.
Yeah. I think I'd be lying to you if I thought I would be that, like that level of good, you know what I mean? Up until my sophomore year of high school, right? I think, because again, he was top in the country, pretty, or top 2 or 3 in 50 freestyle, I think all 4 years or something like that, right? And then up there, right? And then he's pretty high up there in the 100, and then he goes, gets recruited to Stanford and all that. And I would say that again, up until that sophomore season, I thought, I'm a good swimmer. I know I can do well, like, going to win some stuff, but I didn't think the whole like being recruited nationally and being at the top of all these lists. So a lot of that felt pretty foreign and pretty impossible, right? And I just still kind of remember, like, I mean, now you can just go look up anyone's times, right? And you can go watch races, you go get results, whatever. But back then it was like you couldn't. I mean, literally up until I think I went to college, like it was.
You found out what people went when you read Swimming World.
Swimming World, that's it. That's what I was going to say. Is like you didn't find out until you saw like the full list of all the high school times, or like the results of all the meets that they do the highlights or the spotlights of what people did. And so I just remember like you get those issues, and it's like you see what kids across the country that are doing that are your age, and I remember being like, oh my God, like not letting it. It was never that big of an intimidation thing, but it was one of those. You only got reminded of it so often. You just knew what was going on kind of around you, in the state, right? Because you got results from other meets around the state, or if you're in, if you're an age grouper, not even high school yet, then you just show up at the meet. you look at the psych sheet, and you get an idea through that. But it's a little bit different now. So I think that did help as well. Of I don't my brother was so good, but I was, just comparing myself to kind of people around me in the area a lot more than probably like, people in California or whatever. Right. So that came a lot later.
I mean, Morgan, to tell you how far it's changed, in my interview with Devin Nowicki, he was telling me that they've now arrived at a place where they're watching YouTube videos of their rivals to learn their race strategy, and then showing up at the meet and applying what they're going to try and counter the race strategy with. I mean, you talk about a difference from reading Swimming World to find out what the Swimming World was doing to, let me just look this guy up on YouTube and watch a few of his races so I know exactly how he's going to come at me.
Yeah, and it's funny, like, I've thought about this a lot. Is like people ask, like, why are kids so fast now? And like the top end swimmers have gotten, records have gotten faster for sure, right? But the top end swimmers are the it's that next layer down. It's the depth, and also we're getting a lot more of these like random whale high school swimmers that just blow through, and you're like, how is that person doing that? Right? I mean, when I was growing up, there you get one every 3 or 4 years. You get somebody that's just ridiculous, right? Just out of this world good. and now it seems like we've got, and for me it was, I mean, Austin Staub, right? It was the year before I was out of Ohio, was ridiculous, right? I mean, Sean Frazier when he was in high school was pretty fast the year before. But you'd get kind of these one-off guys that come through. And then like when I got to college, you started getting multiple every year. You get Dave Nolan, you get Jack Conger, you get Ryan Murphy, you get Joe Schooling, like all these guys coming down the pipeline, and they're so fast. And it really kind of, I remember I was talking to Tony Betas, who's the club coach at Palo Alto Stanford Aquatic, right? So it's one of the better club teams. And we were just because they also swim at the Stanford pool. And this is when I was still in college. And he was like, Morgan, these guys all know more about recovery and training than I do now. All the kids, right? You just look online, and you can find out anything, right? You talk about Devin, you can go watch, figure out race strategies. You can go figure out recovery stuff, right? What muscle groups you need to work, you need to work on. You can learn that kicking underwater is really important. Turns out like that wasn't really internalized at all for me until college. All sorts of stuff that like never knew, didn't know you were supposed to eat right after practice, like, cause for recovery purposes. I didn't know anything about like using a foam roller, like myofascial release until I got to college, like all that stuff. And it was all the kids now, they've got all this stuff, and I'm not surprised that a lot of kids are going a lot faster than they used to. And I was probably a couple years too young for all of that. And it's kind of funny to think about now, like how different, maybe how different, things would have gone in terms of what I would have done, both planning for races or training or whatever, like, what would have changed or what would have been different? I have no idea, you can't say, but, yeah. So it's just kind of funny to think about. That was kind of a weird tangent, but I've thought about that.
No. So. I can already tell that this is going to be one of my most challenging interviews because I want to go down all of these wormholes with you. If I did, we'd be here for 4 hours, and I don't expect to get all that time from you tonight. So